So I'm the executive director of Oil Change International. We track oil industry money going into the system, particularly tracking who's funding our congressional representatives, supposedly our congressional representatives, and how much money they're giving to the oil industry and the coal industry in terms of subsidies. So we're here for the last 2 weeks to actually say that this is great that we've had this promise of phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, but why don't we use that money to live up to our international obligations towards international climate finance? And we've been pushing hard on that front in a variety of different ways. You hear from the Obama administration and other developed countries that they just couldn't possibly find the money. Well, we know that there is, at least 60 billion locked up annually in fossil fuel subsidies in developed countries.
Didn't the developed countries already decide to stop subsidies to oil companies or to fossil fuel companies?
Yeah, but they haven't decided what they're going to do with that money. And they also are unclear on when that's going to happen. They haven't put a phase-out date on it. So we need to see a near-term phase-out date, something, 2013, 2015 at the latest. And we need that money to be targeted towards solving the problem rather than creating it, which it has been doing in the past.
So you've been here in Copenhagen for most of the talks. What role has the fossil fuel industry played here? How have they lobbied? What sort of presence have they had close to the actual negotiators?
It's interesting. The industry itself sends very few direct representatives here, which is a change. I've been coming to these talks and versions of these talks for 15, 20 years now, 15, and they used to have a really big presence. And now I think they've learned that their best access is back in Washington and other capitals, and they spend a lot of time getting the U.S. government and congressional representatives to come along to their point of view, and then they really don't have to do that much extra work here. This, on the other hand, is the best point of access for development groups and environmental groups to really have access to our representatives here, so that's why we're here in force to try to get them.
So how's it going during this treaty talks? Where are we right now? Where are we headed?
Well, it's interesting, here we are on the morning of the last day, and I think we are, accurately teetering on the brink. I think in the next 12 hours, we're going to know if we are facing a collapse scenario, which would involve the walkout of the G77, which is still unfortunately a possibility because very little has been put on the table in terms of finance. There's a possibility that we'll have a weak agreement, which some of us call greenwash, and of course there's still the possibility that we could actually get some real commitments. So we hope that's what happens, but I would say the smart money is right now that we're going to have a very sort of weak agreement moving forward with at least enough doors open that we can continue to negotiate and press for real action to solve climate change over the next year.
So you said over the next year, what's going to be necessary, almost no matter what happens here in Copenhagen, what's going to be necessary in terms of the climate movement and the climate justice movement back in the States in 2010?
There's no doubt that we have got to not only keep up the pressure but increase it dramatically at this point. I mean, the atmosphere just cannot take any more business as usual, and it's very clear that our government, despite having a government that actually seems to believe that climate change is a problem for the first time in a long while, they're still not taking action fast enough, and obviously the Senate is continuing to be a huge problem, pulling the entire world down. In the U.S., we really need to step up to the fact that we are global citizens and own up to what that means in terms of our responsibility and our need for leadership, the world's need for our leadership, and hopefully we can do that.
So what can be done about the U.S. Senate? I mean, we don't have 60 votes to put our foot on the brake to stop us from going over a cliff in a speeding automobile. So much of it in the analysis breaks down to the U.S. Senate. How do you get 60 votes in the U.S. Senate for something meaningful?
Well, in the short term, you may not actually be able to do it until we actually begin to change some of those seats enough that can really make a difference. And that means that we may need to take more direct action, like with the Clean Air Act and the endangerment finding that we've just seen. The administration may need to step up and actually use that stick that it has. It also means that we need to continue the pressure at the state and local level, where a lot of people have been doing incredibly effective work throughout the Bush administration for the last decade, and really need to keep up that pressure so we stay significantly significantly in front of where the federal government is able to go because, unfortunately, of our retrograde system in the Senate. We really, at the end of the day, it may be that the most important piece of legislation that we can pass in defense of the climate is not cap and trade, but campaign finance reform, and that may be something that we have to focus on in the next year or two.
Thanks, Steve.